Scandinavian Bob here, hi. If you are into NoFap, you have probably read on several places online that people who are doing NoFap often start becoming more of a badass in terms of confidence and less social anxiety. And many people report that they have started giving less of a fuck what other people think of them. Now, I'm going to share a really interesting study related to this in a moment, but let me build up to it some more here first. Okay, so when this badass phenomenon happens, many people just automatically assume that it has to do with increased testosterone levels. But here's the thing, I personally believe that there are many reasons behind this phenomenon. Now, sure, testosterone or increased androgen receptors may play a part, and so too may reduced shame and things like that. But here's what I believe is the biggest factor of them all, so listen up here. As you all know by now, all addictions share the same fundamental brain changes, with one of those changes being a reduced number of dopamine D2 receptors in the brain. Well, here's the deal. The Department of Clinical Neuroscience in Karolinska Institutet in Sweden did a brain and personality study to explore possible associations between the personality trait social desirability and dopamine D2 receptor binding. And what they found was very interesting. They found a negative correlation between dopamine D2 receptor binding in the striatum and social desirability. And so now you say, what does this mean? Well, good question. A negative correlation in this case means that as one variable, in this case dopamine D2 receptors increases, the other variable, social desirability, decreases, and vice versa. And if you didn't know, social desirability is the tendency for people to want to present themselves in a generally favorable fashion. And they do this because they feel a stronger need than others to be liked and accepted. In other words, with more dopamine D2 receptor binding, people don't worry so much about what others may think of them, while with less dopamine D2 receptors, people are generally more afraid. Now, isn't this interesting? Because, well, I can't tell you, if a random dude walked up to me on the street and said, tell me just one thing I could do to get more dopamine receptors, I would just say, stop fapping to porn, and I would walk away. And I would say that because I would assume he is doing that, because, well, most men in today's modern world do. And chances are he's doing it so often that it is really affecting his receptors in a negative way. And as far as that Swedish study goes, that study is not the only one pointing to this dopamine receptor social link either. There are, for example, animal studies showing that monkeys with less dopamine receptors are more submissive and afraid, and that monkeys who are more alpha and dominant have more of those dopamine D2 receptors. Even other human studies have shown that people who are leaders and so-called go-getters tend to have higher dopamine receptor binding than others. And I believe that this has an even higher impact on your badassness than testosterone. And so what I believe is happening here is that many people who go on a NoFap journey have some degree of porn addiction, and as they stay away from the porn, the dopamine D2 receptors in their brain starts to grow back as their addiction heal, and thus they start feeling like, that they give less of a fuck than what they did previously. Now, granted, the studies I mentioned were not NoFap studies. They were just studies on dopamine receptor binding and personality. But you have to remember that all addictions will knock out some of your dopamine receptors. And then that this Swedish study actually showed black on white that with less dopamine receptor binding, people do indeed tend to become more wary of what other people may think of them. But as I said, since there could be even more than this going on, it just goes to show how powerful NoFap really is. I mean, just think about it. If we were to take a big box here and we started adding things to it, we started adding things like increased dopamine receptors and reduced shame and potentially increased androgen receptors that testosterone binds to, and we added increased confidence into that box as well because we feel that we are growing and improving our lives, and we also added potentially increased testosterone and the fact that people tend to respond more positively to you when you are doing NoFap, and we created a nice little package of all of that, then of course that package as a whole could be a powerful driver of that badass feeling people who have quit using porn are reporting. Anyway, I just find these kinds of things so incredibly interesting, so I just have to share them from time to time. So consider subscribing for more, and if you need help with relapses, you can read about my 4-step porn crashing system below, and also to learn more about porn's effect on these dopamine receptors. If you haven't already, make sure to watch my 4-part video series on porn and the brain right here, because when you do, you will for sure discover things that will absolutely blow your mind. Just click on it right now and you'll see exactly what I mean. It's free, of course, so click on it right now and I'll see you over there.